He thought it was just another passenger, an everyday ride in a worn-out car. But when the door shut and he looked in the rearview mirror, the past came flooding back. A forgotten bond, a billionaire in disguise, and one final chance to change everything. Rain danced against the windshield like a soft drumbeat, the early morning gloom smudging the edges of the city into dull gray. Henry's fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, knuckles pale. His back ached more today, a low, throbbing reminder of the hours he'd spent hunched in this old Toyota Corolla. 62 years old, a once proud carpenter turned Uber driver, now whittled down by bad luck and time. "Come on," he muttered as another notification popped up on his cracked phone screen. Another ride. Surge pricing, downtown pickup. He hit accept. Pulling to the curb on a quiet street lined with modern glass facades and cold metal sculptures, Henry tapped his hazard lights. The passenger was already waiting, hood up, head lowered, phone in hand. The guy slid in without a word, soaked jacket leaving water stains on the seat. Henry glanced in the rear view. Something about him familiar. "You're headed to SpaceX?" Henry asked, breaking the silence, noting the destination. The man gave a small nod. "Yeah." The voice, calm, clipped. American, but not flat. Then the man looked up from his phone and their eyes met in the mirror. Time stopped. It wasn't the fame or the face that struck Henry first. It was the eyes. He hadn't seen them in nearly 5 decades, but those eyes hadn't changed. Same intensity. Same slight squint. "When thinking, Elon?" Henry said, voice barely above a whisper. The man blinked, studying Henry's reflection. A pause. Then a slow recognition softened his face. "Henry?" the man said, leaning forward between the seats. "Henry Doyle?" Henry gave a half laugh, half choke. "You've got to be kidding me." Elon Musk sat back, stunned. "Jesus, I didn't recognize you. It's been what, since junior high?" "Yeah," Henry said, exhaling sharply. "St. Joseph's. You were the quiet kid always scribbling rockets in your notebooks. And you were the one always getting into trouble sticking up for me." The car eased back into traffic, neither of them speaking for a beat. The city moved around them, a blur of taillights and rising steam. "How long have you been driving Uber?" Elon asked eventually. Henry smirked, eyes on the road. "Too long. About 6 years now." Elon leaned in. "You were always building stuff. I thought you'd have your own shop by now." Henry chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Life's got a way of taking turns, doesn't it? Got laid off when the mill closed in '09. Wife passed 2 years later. Took care of my daughter till she left for college, then—" He waved a hand. "This." Elon was quiet. "That's rough. I'm sorry." Henry shrugged. "We do what we have to, right?" But his voice cracked at the edges. "You in pain?" Elon asked, noticing Henry shifting uncomfortably. "Yeah, back shot. Sitting like this all day doesn't help. Docs say I need surgery. Insurance says I need a better job first. Have you applied anywhere else?" "I'm 62 with a high school diploma. Most places don't want you unless you can code or lift 50 pounds. And I can't do either." Elon's eyes narrowed. Something flickered behind them. Guilt? Anger? "I never forgot what you did for me," Elon said. "You remember Jake Hall?" Henry laughed. "That oversized goon?" "Yeah. I remember pulling him off you behind the gym. Thought he'd break my nose." "You probably saved my life," Elon said, voice quieter now. "I was ready to quit school back then. I didn't think I'd make it through. You stood up for me when no one else did." Henry shrugged again. "It was nothing. It was everything." They drove on, the silence now heavier, loaded with memory. Elon leaned forward again. "How bad's the surgery?" L4 L5 fusion. 8 grand out of pocket. Can't afford to take the time off either. So I pop Advil, Stretch in parking lots. Keep going. A long pause. You shouldn't be doing this, Elon said almost to himself. Henry laughed dryly. Yeah, well, bills don't pay themselves. What about you? You ever get time to breathe? You're running half the planet now. Elon looked out the window. Sometimes I wonder if I ran too far from where I started. They pulled up to the sleek SpaceX entrance. Security lights blinked like robotic eyes. Elon didn't move. He looked at Henry with a sudden intensity, like he was making a decision, in real time. A part of him that had laid dormant, buried under headlines and numbers and launches, had just been pulled into the light. I want to do something for you, he said. Henry held up a hand. Don't. I'm not looking for handouts. It's not charity, Elon said. It's recognition. Henry raised an eyebrow. Give me a week, Elon said. Can I contact you? Henry hesitated, then slowly nodded. Yeah, same number as the app. Elon opened the door, but before stepping out, he turned back one last time. You ever think maybe the person you protected becomes the person who's supposed to protect you back? And then, he was gone. The door clicked shut. Henry sat there stunned, watching as Elon disappeared behind the gleaming glass doors. The Uber app beeped again. Another ride, another faceless stranger. But this time, Henry didn't move. He stared at the door, at the rain, at the choices he'd made, and the weight they carried. What did Elon mean by do something? Would he actually call? And what if this was just another rich man's momentary guilt? Henry didn't know yet. But something was stirring. Something bigger than a ride. And this was only the beginning. The rain had slowed to a mist, leaving behind streaks across the windshield like the trailing residue of a dream. Henry remained parked, outside the SpaceX building longer than he should have, the wipers squeaking against drying glass, his thoughts louder than the hum of the engine. Give me a week, Elon had said. But Henry had been alive long enough to know that promises, especially from powerful men, were often made in moments of nostalgia, then lost in the next meeting or inbox avalanche. Still, something in Elon's face, something haunted, grounded. Even, it hadn't felt performative. Henry sighed, shifted the car into drive, and merged back into the stream of the waking city. But something inside him had changed. Subtle, like a hairline crack in glass. You wouldn't notice it at first glance, but over time, it would spread. 2 days passed. Nothing. No call, no text. No mysterious emails or sudden offers. Just more rides, more strained smiles, more silent passengers wrapped in their earbuds and TikToks. The familiar ache in his lower back clawed up his spine like a slow, relentless tide. By the third day, Henry had almost convinced himself he'd imagined the entire thing. That it was just a weird ride with a guy who looked a lot like Elon Musk, and maybe he was just a great impersonator. Maybe the real Elon Musk didn't even remember Henry Doyle. Why would he? The past doesn't pay rent. That morning, Henry stopped by a local diner during a rare hour off. Carol's, one of those spots, with plastic-covered menus and bottomless coffee that tasted more like ash than beans. He sat by the window, rubbing his lower back and wincing with each movement. A waitress named Lorna, who always pretended she didn't notice him grimace, refilled his mug without asking. "You're moving like my Uncle Charlie before he got his hip replaced," she said with a smirk. "Your Uncle Charlie didn't spend 12 hours a day in a Corolla built in 2009, Henry muttered, offering a strained smile. She raised an eyebrow. "You okay?" Henry hesitated. Then gave her the half-truth. "Had an old friend come back into my life. Said he might help out, but I'm not holding my breath." Lorna gave him a knowing look. "Hope's a funny thing. It'll gut you or get you through." Before he could reply, his phone buzzed. Unknown. Number, no name, no location. Henry stared at it, his heart unexpectedly thudding against his ribs. He picked up. "Yeah?" A calm voice. "Henry, it's Elon." Henry sat up straighter in the booth. Lorna glanced over from the counter. He turned away, shielding his expression. "I've been meaning to call you sooner," Elon said. "I've been dealing with something." "That's all right," Henry said, but already the old doubt was clawing at his throat. "Didn't think I'd actually hear from you." "You still in LA?" Elon asked. "Yeah." "Why?" "I want you to come to the Hawthorne campus tomorrow, noon. You'll be on the list." "What for?" There was a pause. A conversation, and a chance to change a few things. The next day, Henry found himself driving past the same monolithic gates, the same sleek security checkpoints. This time the guards waved him through without a second glance. Inside, the world felt otherworldly. Gleaming metal corridors, echoes of conversations in accents from every corner of the globe. Engineers moved like chess pieces, focused, fast. It wasn't a workplace. It was a launch pad of minds. Woman with a clipboard met him in the lobby. "Mr. Musk is finishing up a call," she said, gesturing to a private lounge. "He'll be with you shortly." Henry stepped inside. The room was minimalist, modern, almost surgical in its design. He felt like a grease-stained relic in it. His boots squeaked faintly on the polished concrete. The door clicked open. Elon entered, not in a suit, but in a plain black t-shirt and jeans. No security, no entourage, just him. "I didn't expect you to come," he said. "I didn't expect you to call." They sat across from each other. The silence between them buzzed, not awkward but charged. "I've thought a lot about that." "Ride," Elon began. "More than I should have, probably. But I couldn't shake it." Henry gave a shrug. "Guess I have that effect on billionaires." Elon didn't smile. "I've spent years climbing ladders that never end. I've sat in rooms with heads of state, kings, dictators. But none of that felt as real as that 15-minute drive." Henry stayed quiet. Elon leaned forward. "I want to offer you something. Not a handout, a job, a real one. At Tesla." Henry blinked. "Doing what?" "I haven't built anything in years. I'm not a tech guy. You don't have to be. It's a team lead role in one of our legacy restoration projects. Old mechanics retrofitting electric platforms. It's physical, but it comes with full benefits. Medical, too." Henry swallowed hard. "You serious? I wouldn't have brought you here if I wasn't." A beat passed. But then something in Henry twisted. He sat up straighter. "Why me, Elon? Out of everyone?" Elon hesitated. "Because if someone like you hadn't existed back then, I might have disappeared. You saw me, when no one else did." Henry's voice went low. "So this is guilt?" "No," Elon said firmly. "It's recognition. You saved a kid who thought he didn't matter. And that kid ended up having the power to do something about it." Another pause. Henry's fingers curled over the edge of the chair. "But what if I fail?" he asked. "What if I can't do it anymore?" Elon's voice softened. "Then you fail trying. But I don't think you will." Henry leaned back, exhaling slowly. The thought of surgery, of not waking every morning to bone-grinding pain, of being seen again, it scared him more than he cared to admit. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "You have 48 hours, Elon replied. "Then I give it to someone else." There was a knock. Elon's assistant poked her head in. "They're waiting in the design lab." Elon nodded, then looked at Henry again. "I've got to go." He stood, extending his hand. Henry hesitated, then shook it, calloused palm against soft skin. But before Elon left, he turned back. "Don't disappear again, Henry." The door closed, and Henry was left sitting in a room that didn't feel like it was meant for him. But maybe, just maybe, that was about to change. Outside, as he stepped into the daylight, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. But Henry didn't smile. He had a decision to make, and what he couldn't know, was that someone else had overheard the conversation, and they weren't happy. The hallway outside the design lab was quiet, but not silent. Sound moved here with intention. Muffled conversations, the occasional clang of metal, the distant buzz of a welding torch. Behind one of the thick glass partitions, a man leaned slightly forward, watching the lounge where Henry had just been. His ID badge read D. Rowe, Advanced Systems Manager. Darren Rowe had been with SpaceX for nearly a decade. He wasn't flashy. He didn't chase headlines or tweet wild theories at 3 a.m., but he got things done. Quietly, ruthlessly, efficiently, and most importantly, he understood the rules. The rules that people like Elon Musk sometimes forgot, or pretended didn't, apply to them. The rules that made companies work, not idealism, not sentiment. He tapped his earpiece. "Rachel, pull the access log for the guest in Lounge 4C. I want a full profile." "On it," came the reply. Darren turned back to the lounge just as Henry stepped out, blinking into the California sun like a man surfacing from a long dive. Darren narrowed his eyes. A washed-up Uber driver? Being offered a team lead position? No experience, no clearance, no qualifications. "What the hell are you doing, Elon?" Henry drove in silence, the offer replaying in his head like a scratched record. The streets blurred past, a city full of people chasing something: time, money, purpose. He didn't go home. Instead, he drove to the only place that ever quieted his thoughts. An old fenced-off lot just outside East LA. It used to be a woodworking shop he'd helped build with his own hands decades ago, before everything went sideways. The sign was still half-hanging. Doyle and Sons Fine Woodcraft. A lie, even then. He'd never had a son, just one daughter he barely saw now, wrapped in her own world across the country. He stepped out of the car, slowly, spine stiff as steel rods, and stared at the building through the fence. Boards covered the windows. Weeds had claimed the foundation. But in his mind, he could still hear the saws, the radios playing classic rock, the clink of coffee, mugs on the dusty workbench. That offer. It scared him more than poverty ever had. He'd learned to survive with nothing. But what if he tried again and failed? What if this was just a momentary kindness from a man too rich to understand consequences? Or what if it wasn't? Inside a sleek office tower overlooking the SpaceX compound, Darren Rowe sat reviewing Henry's digital footprint. It wasn't impressive. Sporadic work history. Multiple gaps. One old misdemeanor. A fight in a bar years ago. Not criminal, but not corporate safe either. A knock. Rachel stepped in, holding a folder. "You were right." Musk bypassed HR protocols, logged him straight into the back end for a Tier 3 position. Benefits, medical, clearance, all green-lit without vetting. Darren nodded slowly. "We can't allow this," she hesitated. "You want me to intervene?" "Not yet. But start the process. Quietly. I want red flags marked and noted. If we're bringing on a liability, I need cause to reject the move. If Musk wants to play the humanitarian, let him do it on his own dime, not ours." Rachel nodded. "And if he pushes?" Darren's eyes narrowed. "Then we remind him this isn't a charity. It's a rocket company." That night, Henry sat in his apartment, a small second-floor unit with creaking floorboards, and the scent of old coffee permanently steeped into the wallpaper. His boots lay by the door, soles splitting, the edges dark with years of grime. He stood in front of the mirror, buttoning the only dress shirt he owned, a faded blue Oxford with a missing collar button. Tomorrow was the deadline. 48 hours, do it, he thought. Just say yes. But his hand froze over his phone. He stared at the empty screen, the offer hanging in digital limbo. Doubt crept in. What if he walked in and they laughed him out the room? What if this was just Musk's guilt trying to buy redemption? Then again, maybe it was real. Maybe this was the moment. The one you didn't see coming but changed everything. He hit send. Text to Elon. I'm in. Just tell me where and when. A few minutes later, a reply buzzed. Elon. Good. Monday, 9 a.m. Orientation, Fremont plant. We'll fly you out. Henry stared. At it fly. He hadn't been on a plane in 15 years. Monday came with a nervous energy he hadn't felt in decades. The flight was quick but surreal. An assistant met him at the terminal with a company car. By 8:30 a.m., he stood at the Tesla Fremont plant's orientation wing, dressed in a new polo they'd shipped him. His back twinged, but he didn't complain. He sat in a row with others, mostly younger, mostly engineers, feeling like a fossil in a museum. A man in a headset handed him a badge. Welcome, Mr. Doyle. He stared at it. Henry Doyle, Legacy Integration Team Lead. Just like that, it felt real. Until the next moment. Mr. Doyle? A woman in a gray suit approached him. Can I borrow you for a moment? He followed her into a glass-walled office. She shut the door behind them. There's been a complication, she said. Henry's stomach dropped. What kind of complication? Your onboarding flagged a few inconsistencies. Our system auto-flagged some risks. Health disclosures. Background anomalies. Anomalies, he echoed, confused. What, that I can't touch my toes? That I had a bar fight in 2004? The woman didn't laugh. I'm sorry, Mr. Doyle, but based on our current HR protocols, we can't proceed with your placement until further review. It may take several weeks to resolve. He stood there, feeling the ground tilt. You're kidding. I wish I was. He stared at her, then down at the badge in his hand. His name, his shot. Does Elon know? A pause. We operate independently, of executive influence in these matters. Bull. It was a shutdown. A clean one. Clinical. Quiet. Henry felt something burn deep in his chest. Not pain. Not quite rage. A sense of being played. Of reaching for something only to have it yanked away mid-air. He stood, jaw tight. Tell Elon I stopped waiting for people to save me a long time ago. And then he walked out, badge still in hand. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that across the country, Elon had just opened an email from Darren Rowe, and the subject line read, Urgent, concerning Henry Doyle's employment. And for the first time in a long while, Elon Musk was angry. Not the performative kind of anger, not the mild Twitter jabs, or clipped boardroom tone. This was the old kind, the kind that burned from somewhere primal, the kind that surged up from years of being told he couldn't, shouldn't, wasn't allowed. Elon stood in his office at the top of Tesla HQ, a sleek and angular room that overlooked the Fremont factory like the bridge of a spaceship. The email still glowed on his screen. Due to unresolved discrepancies and non-compliance with standard vetting procedures, Henry Doyle's placement has been delayed indefinitely pending further review. Bullshit. He hit the intercom. Get Darren Rowe in here, now! Sir, he's in. I don't care if he's on Mars, now! A beat. Then, yes, sir. Elon paced. His hands moved restlessly, fingers twitching like code was running through them. He could still see Henry's face, weathered, tired, but lit with something fragile when he held that ID badge, like a man daring to believe again. And you just crushed that. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss. Darren Rowe stepped in, calm as ever, wearing a sharp charcoal suit and the expression of a man who had already anticipated this conversation. You wanted to see me. Don't play coy, Darren, Elon said, not even turning around. You flagged Doyle's onboarding. I did. Why? He didn't pass the background screen. I overrode the screen. And I reactivated it, Darren said, stepping closer. For good reason. The man has no relevant experience. He has medical liabilities. And, frankly, he poses a reputational risk if anything goes wrong under his leadership. He's not leading a rocket launch, Elon snapped. He's managing retrofitting, mechanics, and he's one of the most decent people I've ever known. Then put him in your house and pay him under the table, Darren said coolly. But don't drag your personal nostalgia into a corporate framework. We have standards. Elon turned slowly. His voice dropped an octave. Dangerous. Controlled. Let me be extremely clear, Darren. When I say someone is coming on board, they come on board. I don't care if they flunk your spreadsheet. He gets the job. And the benefits. And the damn surgery. Darren didn't flinch. And when he becomes a liability? When OSHA finds out he's unfit for industrial labor? When someone digs into his past and writes a headline about your childhood friend welfare program? What then? Elon stepped closer, nose to nose. Then I'll take responsibility. Darren didn't blink. That's not how responsibility works. It rolls downhill, always, and you know that. For a long second, neither man moved. Outside the glass, robotic arms moved silently on the floor, assembling the future piece by piece. Elon exhaled through his nose. This isn't about policy. This is about control. You hate that I made a decision without you. I hate that you're willing to set fire to the system for a man who hasn't earned it, Darren said. Elon. Both men turned. A new voice. Low. Surprised. Henry Doyle stood in the doorway, holding the same badge they'd given him hours ago. His face unreadable. Your assistant called me. Said you wanted me to stay in town another day. Elon stepped forward. Henry, I'm sorry. What happened? Henry raised a hand. Let me talk, please. Elon went still. I appreciate the offer. I do, but it's clear I don't belong here. I'm not the guy you used to know. I'm not some redemption arc. I'm just a man trying to survive. Henry, you gave me a gift. You reminded me I was more than just this. He gestured at his worn jeans, his hunched frame. But this isn't my world. It's yours. And I'm not going to force my way into it if it means someone else has to bend the rules. Darren watched in silence. The moment was perfectly engineered to dissolve everything. But Elon took a step closer. You didn't ask for this, I did, he said. I offered because I believe in you. Because when I had nothing, you gave me the courage to stand back up. And now you want to repay the favor? Henry asked. No, Elon said. Now I want to honor it. A long pause. Henry's eyes flicked to Darren. And what about him? Elon didn't look away. He doesn't get to decide. Darren's mouth twitched. Actually, I do. Until you write a formal override, which takes board approval and legal clearance, then I'll get it, Elon snapped. I'll take it to the board. I'll call a vote. I'll pull every string I need to. But he's staying. Henry shook his head slowly. You're willing to go to war over me? Elon's voice dropped. You already went to war for me. You just didn't wear a suit when you did it. For a moment, Henry stood between them. One man with power beyond comprehension, and another who had never known more than survival. The space between them crackled with the weight of decades. Then Henry did something that shocked both of them. He dropped the badge on the floor. I don't need charity, he said, voice firm. But if you're serious, if this is a real job with a real team, where I'm not just a symbol, then I'll earn it. From the bottom up, I don't want the shortcut. Darren opened his mouth, but Elon raised a hand. Done. Henry blinked. What? You start at the floor level. Apprentice position. 3 months. Full medical coverage from day one. You work, you prove yourself. Then we revisit the team lead offer. Darren scoffed. That's not protocol. Elon turned to him. Then change the protocol, or tender your resignation. Silence. Darren's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Elon extended his hand again. This time Henry took it. And somewhere deep inside, something old and heavy broke loose. Not pain, not pride, but possibility. Henry nodded once. All right, let's do it. But as they left the office, neither of them noticed Darren's hand tighten into a fist because Darren Rowe wasn't finished. Not yet. And the next move he planned wouldn't be about HR files or background checks. It would be personal. Darren Rowe wasn't used to losing. He had survived 7 departmental restructures, 2 whistleblower investigations, and 1 near-catastrophic rocket failure that should have ended his career. Each time he'd made it through because he understood one thing better than anyone. Corporations weren't built on dreams. They were built on control, predictability, order. But Elon Musk had just shattered that order for the sake of a 62-year-old Uber driver with a limp and a worn-out past. And Darren? He wasn't about to let that stand. He pulled strings. Quietly. He filed a compliance review request with a partner team, disguised it in bureaucratic language, slipped a health liability flag into Henry's file. An old trick, just enough to trigger questions. Not a termination, just discomfort, friction. Make the old man want to quit before anyone had to fire him. But something unexpected happened. Henry didn't break. 3 weeks into the job, Henry was the first one in the workshop and the last one to leave. The Fremont facility's legacy integration wing was nothing like the Uber rides or even the old woodshop he used to run. This place hummed with electricity. Giant robotic arms hovered over deconstructed chassis, and every corner buzzed with the kind of precision that made Henry feel like he was inside a watch. He wasn't an engineer, and he didn't pretend to be. But when they gave him tools, something in him clicked. Instincts from decades of hands-on work came rushing back. He might not have spoken their technical language, but he knew machines, knew how they felt under his hands, how a bolt whispered before it stripped, how a misaligned frame sounded before it even became visible. Most of the younger guys were skeptical at first. Some ignored him. Others watched him like he was an experiment, but slowly the skepticism faded. One day, a line supervisor named Mateo handed him a torque wrench with a quiet respect. "Can you check alignment on bay 6? Feels off." Henry nodded without fanfare and got to work. That was how he earned their trust. Not with speeches or bravado, but by showing up, listening, helping, staying late to clean up messes he didn't make. And behind that steady work, a storm quietly brewed. Darren's tactics escalated. Emails flagged Henry's badge for irregular activity. His paycheck was delayed twice. The system mysteriously dropped his medical file, forcing him to reapply for surgery coverage. Each time Henry fought back, not with rage, but with persistence. He filled out the forms again, called HR himself, spoke to supervisors with calm, measured language that couldn't be twisted against him. The old Henry might have walked away, but not this time. One morning, after a particularly cold exchange with HR, Henry sat outside the facility on a brake bench, the sun warming his shoulders. His back was screaming, the pain spiking harder lately. The surgery date still hadn't been locked in. He stared out over the vast lot of Teslas, 1,000 futures gleaming in metal rows. Elon found him there. "Got your message," he said, lowering himself beside Henry. "Figured you were too busy launching satellites to deal with petty politics." Elon smiled. "I deal with both, usually at the same time." Henry rubbed his neck. "Someone's messing with the system. We both know who." "I know," Elon said. "And I've been watching." Henry raised an eyebrow. "You let it happen?" "I needed to see if you'd quit." Henry looked away, the sting sharper than expected. "And now that I didn't?" "Now," Elon said, You've proved more than I ever could have with a promotion. You didn't earn your place here because of me. You earned it in spite of me." Henry let that sit. Let it mean something. Because it did. "Elon, I don't want war. I just want a place where I can be useful again." Elon looked out over the lot. "You are. You've already changed the floor culture. Your team's productivity is up 15%. You've mentored 2 new hires, and, according to Mateo, you saved a $250,000 retrofit from failing last week." "I did?" "You didn't even know," Elon smiled. "That's how I know it's real." A silence passed between them. A good one. Then Elon stood, brushing off his jeans. "I've already submitted final clearance for your surgery, full coverage, travel, rehab, everything." Henry blinked. "Just like that?" "Not just like that," Elon said. "You earned it. You stayed. You fought. And Darren? He's no longer with us," Elon said, "officially pursuing other opportunities. I wished him well." Henry gave a small, hard smile. "That's one way to say it." "He underestimated you," Elon added. "Most people do." Henry stood slowly, the pain in his back less sharp now, not because it had vanished, but because it finally had. A timeline. An end. "Appreciate you not giving up on me," Henry said. Elon clapped a hand on his shoulder. "I wasn't returning a favor. I was investing in one." They stood there a moment longer. Then Elon pulled something from his pocket. A small folded photo. Henry unfolded it. 2 kids, mid-teens, standing in front of a chalkboard. One scrawny, awkward kid with wild hair and nervous eyes. The other, broader, fists clenched, like he'd just finished shoving someone away. Henry laughed. "Where'd you get this?" "School archives. Digitalized everything a few years back." Henry stared at it, and something caught in his throat. "It's funny," he said. "I always thought I peaked back then." "No," Elon said, walking away. "You just hadn't launched yet. The day of the surgery, the hospital room was quiet, clean, efficient." Henry lay on the bed, IV in his arm, soft beeping in the background. For the first time in years, he didn't feel small, or forgotten, or invisible. He felt ready. The door opened. A nurse stepped in. "You've got a visitor before we take you." "In?" Henry turned, expecting Elon. It wasn't, it was Mateo, from the workshop, holding a get-well card signed by the entire team. Inside was a note. "We've got your bay covered. Get back soon, boss." Henry couldn't stop the tears. He didn't want to. Recovery took weeks. Then rehab. But when he walked back into the Fremont plant 3 months later, something strange happened. People cheered. He tried to wave it off, embarrassed. But Elon had sent out a memo that morning. "Today we welcome back someone who reminds us all why we build, why we fight, why we launch. Welcome home, Henry." Years later, Henry would retire, not because he had to, but because he was ready. By then, he'd mentored dozens, helped build a program for midlife retraining in Tesla's workforce. Even consulted on the design of ergonomic stations that protected other workers' backs. And Elon? He still called once in a while, sometimes just to say thanks, sometimes with a wild idea. But he always ended the call the same way. "Hey, Henry, you still got my back?" And Henry would grin. "Always."